We're going to get started with our next text. It's by Jack London, which you've already read with The Law of Life, and this is his reading on To Build a Fire. In here, I've annotated for the following, marking setting facts in yellow, setting figurative patterns and authorial technique in green, contradictions between man and nature in purple, significance in blue, and possibilism and determinism in pink. Now, to review what Mr. Gifford has already taught about determinism and possibilism, I want us to think about these concepts, where determinism is the view that the nature environment has the controlling influence over various aspects of human life, and possibilism is the theory that the physical environment may set limits on human actions, but people have the ability to adjust and adapt to the physical environment. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read the text, and then I'm going to go and talk about why I highlighted the things that I did and how they can impact and relate to one another as we go through the text. All right, to build a fire. Day had dawned cold and gray when the man turned aside from the main Yukon Trail. He climbed the high earth bank where a little traveled trail led east through the pine forest. It was a high bank, and he paused to breathe at the top. He excused the act to himself by looking at his watch. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. There was no sun or promise of sun, although there was not a cloud in the sky. It was a clear day. However, there seemed to be an indescribable darkness over the face of things. That was because the sun was absent from the sky. This fact didn't worry the man. He was not alarmed by the lack of sun. It had been days since he had seen the sun. The man looked along the way he had come. The Yukon lay a mile wide and hidden under 3 feet of ice. On top of this ice were as many feet of snow. It was all pure white. North and south, as far as his eye could see, it was an unbroken white. The one thing that relieved the whiteness was a thin, dark line that curved from the pine-covered island to the south. It curved into the north, where it had disappeared behind the pine-covered island. This dark line was the trail, the main trail. It led south 500 miles to the Chilkoot Pass in saltwater. It led north 75 miles to Dawson, and still farther on to the north, 1,000 miles to Nulato, and finally to St. Michael on Bering Sea. 1,000 miles and a half, 1,000 more. But all this, the distant trail, no sun in the sky, the great cold, and the strangeness of it all, had no effect on the man. It was not because he was long familiar with it. He was a newcomer in the land, and this was his first winter. The trouble with him was that he was not able to imagine. He was quick and ready for things in life, but only in the things, not in their meanings. 50 degrees below zero meant 80 degrees of frost. Such facts told him that it was cold and uncomfortable, and that was all. It didn't lead him to consider his weakness as a creature affected by temperature, nor did he think about man's general weakness, able to live only within the narrow limits of heat and cold. From there, it did not lead him to thoughts of heaven and their meaning of man's life. 50 degrees below zero meant a bite of frost that hurt, and that must be guarded against the use of mittens, ear coverings, warm moccasins, and thick socks. 50 degrees below zero was to him nothing more than 50 degrees below zero. That it should be more important than that was a thought that never entered in his head. As he turned to go, he forced some water from his mouth as an experiment. There was a sudden noise that surprised him. He tried it again, and again in the air before they could fall to the snow. The drops of water became ice that broke with a noise. He knew that at 50 degrees below zero, from the mouth made a noise when it hit the snow. But this had done that in the air. Undoubtedly, it was colder than 50 below. But exactly how much colder, he didn't know. But the temperature didn't matter. He was headed for the old camp on Henderson Creek, where the boys were already. Okay, So I'm going to go over these first 2 pages, and really quick you can see I have highlighted all of the literal portions of the setting in yellow. And the reason why I did that is because there's so much contrast in here. A, the literal of what the man actually sees in this setting, and B, the green, the metaphorical of what he's missing out on. And then I went and highlighted in the pink the ideas between the theme of appearance versus reality. So we've got this yellow and this green contrasted next to each other. Yes, we are at the Yukon Trail, but he's missing out on all the metaphorical things. He doesn't see a sun, doesn't think anything about it. And he misses some meaning here, and also aspects of foreshadowing. So I said I chose to highlight the setting in yellow because it never changes. I chose to highlight the man in pink as a contrast to the setting. Even though the unnamed main character should worry about the setting, he didn't. We have a contrast between the man and the reality of nature. We have a parallelism between the perceived setting and the character, the surface level. So here we can see a theme of appearance versus reality, and the ideas of possibilism, man's thought, versus determinism, nature. We need to keep going to see if we can identify patterns of how the author wants us to perceive possibilism versus determinism. Which side should we be on? Later on in here, I just put in here, look how the author uses factual information. And then it shows us how much the character misses, right? Because he sees nothing beyond facts. Well, nature doesn't care about facts. I put the author parallels the abundant use of facts with the character's lack of development to emphasize the character's inability to infer between what's literally seen. Notice this shift, but there is more than factual information, and this is what the main character, the man, chooses to ignore. I chose to highlight figurative language that shows the man's ignorance of the nature's power and depth. The facts and his weaknesses are repeated to emphasize what he should have considered. There is a fine line between life and death, much like the narrow limits of heat and cold. We must know our limitations, but unfortunately, the man never chooses to think beyond facts. Literary choices you could think of, repetition you'll find throughout, juxtaposition, placing ideas, concepts, character with setting side by side. You've also got contrast, foreshadowing. We've got a theme here of appearance versus reality, the possibilism of man's thoughts where he can overcome nature versus determinism. I put on here, he knows better, but he chooses not to listen to himself, his intuition. Many times we fail to follow our intuition and choose a more dangerous life path. That's going to be a significance there where we can connect it to aspects of possibilism and determinism, right? If the man had chosen to follow his intuition and respect more aspects in the depth and beauty of nature, maybe he wouldn't be in the predicament that he's in on the bottom of page 2. I also noted a lot of negative transitions, but, nor, so a lot of that throughout. So I just marked that because it was just a pattern, and I want to see if I can do something with it later. I put on here also, he perceived nature as surface level, but just because he believes it to be true does not mean it is reality. This quote shows the depth of nature contrasted with the man's surface level thoughts. So as you can see, I'm beginning to track patterns of the depth of nature versus the simplicity that man's perspective has on nature. And we'll see if this plays out throughout the reading. Your homework for tonight is to read the next few pages or so and continue on with marking the literal setting in yellow, the figurative patterns that you see in green, the contradictions between man's thoughts with the complexity of nature in purple, significance of blue where we can have that human connection, that human condition, and aspects of possibilism and determinism in pink.